Okay. Okay, so we're live now. So good evening, everybody. This is Vicky Raven from Well Kids Cracking the Teenage Puzzle. And I can see that people are joining. I can't see who it is for some peculiar reason. I normally get a list of everybody that's joined. So I can't see your names, which is a bit of a shame, but I can see that there are people in the webinar room. And so Well Kids Cracking the Teenage Puzzle, I started this organisation because I'm really passionate about helping you as parents with everything that's really important to you. So things like how you communicate with your teenager, what you do when your teenager is just really objectionable, what you do when your teenager won't speak to you, what you do when you have your teenager's school phoning you, you know, all of those kinds of things that really you are not in your kind of plan as being a parent. When you have this tiny little bundle of joy, you think, you know, it's going to be lovely and joyous and happy for the rest of your life. And as the teenage years approach, it often turns out not to be the kind of joyous, lovely life that you had envisaged. And one of the stresses that parents talk to me a lot about, and particularly at this time of the year, is their anxiety around how they get their teenagers to revise for upcoming exams. And that could be school exams. They usually happen around, I think, probably May time. But really importantly, GCSEs are looming large, and AS exams, and of course A2 exams, which are sort of, but not always, sort of a one-off really, and quite a lot hangs upon how well your teenager does in those exams. And sometimes, I don't know, we have more anxiety around those exams than our teenagers do, because of course we've lived a bit longer than them, and you know, with the benefit of hindsight, we can see that, you know, if perhaps, you know, we feel if we'd worked a little bit harder or we'd had a bit more of a revision plan, things could have been a little bit different for us. So, you know, we hope for the best for our teenagers. We want the best for them. And sometimes that depends on doing well in their public exams. And for them, it seems like quite a long time until May, June, when they have to actually sit those exams. But we know as parents that time races past very, very quickly. So tonight, I'm really delighted to be able to introduce to you Lucy and Mags, and I'm not going to introduce their business to you because they'll do that better than I will. And they're going to explain to you how you can make the revision process much, much easier and a much smoother ride for you and for your teenager, and how it can be, you know, have a much better outcome if you have a system and if you have a plan. So I'm going to hand over to them. If you have any questions, if you could just put them in the chat box, and all three of us will see those in the box. They will only come through to us. They won't be, none of the other attendees will see them. So if they're personal questions, that's fine. And I just want to reassure you that we won't be reading out names. We'll just be reading out the question. And of course, you know, I'm guessing that lots of the questions are going to be really useful to all of the people on the webinar tonight. So I'm going to hand over to Mags and Lucy.
Hello. Is that coming through now?
I can hear you, yes.
Hello, I'm Lucy, and my colleague here is, well, she'll introduce herself.
Okay, so I'm Mags. Our company is K Planning Tools. We set the business up because when my daughter was facing her GCSE exams and was getting incredibly stressed about her first exam, I came up with a system which I then introduced into my school because I work as a learning mentor, and it's helped hundreds of young people to deal with the stress of exam pressure. So when Lucy heard about it, she invested in my business, basically. So we've moved on since then. We've realised that it's not just the package itself and the tool that I developed, but it's the expertise behind the tool that makes the difference. So really, it's thanks to Vicky for giving us this opportunity to support you, really. I really like the way Vicky phrased it. She said, to find a balance between nagging them to death and supporting them with the revision. And I thought that was a really good way of phrasing exactly what the scenario is for parents at the moment. Yeah. So I've been through the situation myself. I've got two, well, my youngest is now 18, my oldest is 22. So they've been through it themselves. And I understand it from a parent's point of view, from your perspective, but also from the student's perspective and the teacher's perspective, because I work in that environment all the time, helping young people to face challenges with their education.
I'll just say, sorry, I just have to apologise. I'm just sitting here, but I haven't done a webinar before. But Mags and I have known each other, you know, come together socially. And then Mags just came up to me one day with her idea. And my background is project management. I thought, that's a really good idea, you know, and it's really simple, straightforward process. And often the simple ideas are the ones that work. And that was a few years ago. And here we are now, business partners, and selling our process and our idea, and ultimately our pack to parents to help them work with their children to organise their revision time. And we have such great feedback. If you have a chance to have a look at our website, those are all genuine quotes from students and teachers and parents. So we know that we're really helping people out there, and it's just great, really great feeling. Mags spends a lot of time answering questions. So do
you want me to?
Yeah, I'll let you get,
okay.
Get in there.
So because there are no questions yet in the chat room, I think the easiest thing is to just tell you about the kind of things that parents and students bring to me, and the way they describe what they're facing, and then to present some solutions, really. I think Vicky said that what she wants you to get out of this is everything you need to know to get your team to revise. What else did she say? Understanding why it's difficult for you as a parent, understanding why it's difficult for your team, and that I would split that up into the revision time itself, and then into the exams themselves and why exams are stressful for young people. How early do they need to start revising? That's a good question. Okay. In order to answer that, I think what we need to do is just think a little bit about what happens when people start to get stressed with anything in their life. What it does, it affects you emotionally. And when you're emotionally involved, that affects your higher level thinking. Now, the earlier a student can on top of that and take their time with revision and know that they can comfortably fit their revision in, the better in terms of stress management. So the answer to that is as soon as possible, obviously. Now, I know that parents, you know, very often they're saying to me things like, I keep trying to get them to revise, they don't seem to realise how important it is, I'm trying to push them and they're not doing anything. And as we all know, you know, with a teenager, you've only got to say the slightest thing for them to pick up maybe a different, you know, if you try and support a teenager, they'll often see that as you pushing them. So it's a kind of you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, as far as being a parent goes at this time of year. The idea really is that you need to support them to start their revision. So the sooner the better, really. But what I'd like to do before we answer that fully in terms of how many weeks, what I'd like to do is explain what I always explain to teenagers, and very often to their parents as well, about what happens when we feel stressed. Now, you know I might be preaching to the converted, and, you know, I'm sure people who watch this webinar will know themselves a lot of the information that I'm giving. But I just think it's nice to recap and make sure people are familiar with this. Okay. So what I'm going to do is just show some resources that I use with teenagers and parents. So can we see this? Lucy, can I ask you to hold that so it can be seen on the screen? No. Okay, there. That'll do, I think. So you might not be able to see the writing, but can you see? It's an image really of how the brain is structured. It's only a model. Obviously, the brain isn't like this at all, but it's a very useful model for explaining to teenagers what happens when they feel stressed. Now, the brain is structured in 3 layers, really. And school and exams are all to do with filling the top bit in. This is called the intellectual brain, the thinking brain. Doing well in exams is about what happens in that part of your brain, isn't it? In the top. I'm pointing to the wrong place because it's hard to do it. In the top part of your brain. But actually, what's more important is what's happening in the 2 parts of the brain, the more ancient parts of the brain underneath that, which are the emotional brain and the reptilian brain under there. So I'm going to move the resource out of the way because I think it's more distracting than anything. But if we just, for a minute, think about what happens when we're under stress. So not really thinking about the teenager for a moment, but...
Oh, sorry.
Have we gone off screen?
So we've got a question, so they're not able to see anything on the screen.
Oh, okay. So is it because of this, Lucy, where it says you?
Can you hear me, Vicky? Oh, Vicky's gone off.
I can hear you. Yes, I can hear you.
Can you see us, Vicky?
Can you see that message?
See you.
Okay.
Okay, Carl,
one
can you see Max and Lucy? Can you type, Carl, could you type in the box whether you can see Max and Lucy?
Perhaps you can't hear either.
Okay, oh yes, I can see you. I can see you. Uh-oh. It was all going really well. I don't know why, because I can see everything broadcasting. Now and again, but most of the time I just have a Google image. Okay, I wonder whether that's to do with broadband width.
Should we carry on, and then we'd perhaps have to. Carl is one of our contacts, if that's okay, and we can pick up with him afterwards. It's very frustrating, but it's just because time will tick on.
I think carry on, and then we can listen to the recording. And if the recording isn't good enough, then you could maybe record it again.
Yeah.
And then I can just email it out to everybody.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
So for the benefit of Carl, because you can't see us, but I think you can hear us. Yeah. Okay. So I'll try and describe things without using any resources for the time being. Then, if you can't see on the screen, basically our brains are structured in 3 parts. And for young people, they're very conscious that school is testing their intellectual ability, and they get worried about their intellectual ability. Now, if we're feeling stressed, it actually shuts off our higher level thinking, and all the energy goes down to the lower part of the brain, the more ancient parts of the brain, the limbic system, which is the emotional system, and the immune system. Now, if I explain this to students, all of a sudden they seem to get it. They seem to know then how to look after themselves and how to make sure that they don't get too stressed. So I think what I'll do is just explain that briefly to you. So the reptilian part of the brain, the very bottom part of the brain, which is the bit that keeps you alive, that's the bit that controls your basic instincts. So anything that's to do, obviously, with keeping you alive, like your breathing, your heart rate, a sense of territory, and also flight, fight, and fight are in there. So when students are mega stressed, it's that part of the brain that takes over. Now, if that part of the brain is activated now, even in the run-up to the exams, then obviously they're going to find the whole thing a lot more stressful, and they're going to find that they can't remember things. So it's incredibly important that we look after the reptilian part of the brain, the fight or fight response. Flight, fight, or freeze, it's called. So I'm sure you know about that response. If you just think about yourself when you feel stressed, people use the phrase of, I couldn't think straight, you know, I don't know what happened, I was just really stressed and I froze, those kind of statements. So when you're talking to your team and you realize that that is the situation that they're in, we need to take the stress out of that. Carl says he can now see us, which is great. So you need to first and foremost deal with the stress and the flight or fight response, if indeed that's what your team is experiencing. Okay. Now the bit above that, the bit that it takes the next priority, is the emotional brain. Now your emotional brain is the bit that controls things like your sleep, your health, your immune system, your sexuality. When you hit puberty, all of those things are controlled by the limbic system and by hormones. But what's really interesting is that is the part of the brain that plays a really important role in memory and learning. Okay, now we don't remember things that aren't important to us. We forget things if they don't have any personal relevance to us. And this is something that if teenagers understand that, they then find it much easier to tackle their learning. So one of the things is about talking to them about why it's important to them personally to do well. Now, what I find is with the best of interests, schools and parents, maybe without even saying it, the student picks up on the pressure side of it. And I think this generation, I feel quite sorry for them in some ways, because I feel that they are a generation who's been tested all the way through school. They've always had that pressure of, they know exactly what targets they're supposed to be reaching. If they don't reach those targets, they feel they've let themselves down, they feel they've let school down, and they just feel pressure all the time. Now, some students are so used to it, they don't take it seriously, but some take it incredibly seriously. And if they're targeted to get an A grade or a B grade or a C grade, and they're not getting that grade, they start to feel stressed, they start to feel that it's their fault. And sometimes a lack of progress with things like revision isn't to do with a lack of will, it's to do with the student just having a fear of failure more than anything. And it's almost like subconsciously they say to themselves, if I don't try, I can't fail. So it's careful taking your bat and ball home, isn't it, really? I'm not going to play this game. So when parents are supporting a young person and trying to encourage them to revise, one of the first things they have to recognize is where that young person is in a if you like, I call it the wheel of change, in that process of change. It's helping the young person to identify exactly where they are at the moment and to take personal responsibility, but to give them the tools in which to do that, the support which they need. You can't just leave it all up to them and wash your hands of it, in my view. It's about, I care about you, I want to be able to help you to move forward. So let's see what we can do. A lot of it is just exploring the students' feelings around exams. And in fact, after I created this revision planning aid to help students to get started with revision and to keep going all the way through to their exams, what we began to realize is the expertise behind this, the things like understanding about the three-part brain, how your brain works, how best to improve your memory and make sure that you're moving forward with your revision, that expertise, we started to realize it's all about loving exams. That's why the next part of our business, we're launching something called Learn to Love Exams. And, we know teenagers aren't going to absolutely love exams. We mean more to do with embracing everything there is about exams and coming to recognize that exams actually can have a positive It can be a positive experience for young people and for parents to work together to overcome the worries that the student has and to help them to succeed. And what we're aiming for with students, parents and schools is to try and get that young person to embrace the challenge of exams and not be so terrified by them that they just want to take the bat and ball home and run away from it. So I think let's see what question we can answer now. How soon should they start? Okay, well, the way I would discuss this with a student is you need to be able to get to the point on exam days where you walk into the exam room feeling totally prepared for that exam. You've done all your revision, you've fitted all the topics in that you were supposed to learn, you know what's going to be on that paper, and you're ready for it. Now, in order to get to that position, you'll need to put certain things in place, and you need to do that comfortably in time for the exams. A lot of students make the mistake of saying to themselves, I've got a rubbish memory, so if I start too soon, I'll just forget it all and I'll waste my time and I'll only have to repeat it. So they make the mistake, in my view, of leaving it right till the 11th hour and they cram, okay? Now, when I talk to parents, a lot of parents had that strategy themselves when they were young. And things have moved on an awful lot in the last 20 years or so in terms of us understanding what happens when people are under stress and how best to revise and use your memory. There's a lot more information now for young people on strategies for revision. So where I was at school, certainly, no one really told us about memory techniques and how best to learn. So the only strategy we had really, and I think you said this as well, Lucy, haven't you? The only strategy really was to read your own notes. And I mean, I used to sort of just turn over the pages and almost go into my mind, that subliminal messaging sort of thing. I didn't really have any proper strategies, but there are so many tools and techniques now for young people. And the whole key to revising is to make revision fun. Now, I know that sounds like a tall order for a teenager who's not enjoying their studies, but if we can get to the point where revision is fun and little and often and start early, then that student is going to get to the exam room fully prepared, and that's what they're aiming for. Now, I was mentoring a year 11 student today, and we had this same discussion. There is absolutely no point in peaking too soon when it comes to exams. What you don't want to do is to be ready months in advance and then have lost interest by the time the exams come. So there's obviously an optimum time. And over, since 2009, when Lucy and I have been working on this really, I've come to the conclusion that the best time to really start planning for revision is around February half-term time. And in the period between February half-term and the Easter break is when they should at least have planned how they're going to spend their time. Obviously, if things have ticked on and they've lost that opportunity, it's never too late. You can always learn how to do it. And I'm going to share with you some strategies in terms of time management and organisation. But in terms of just helping a young person to recognise how much time they have left between whenever it is and their exams and how best to use that time. Now, every student's different. Every student will have some subjects that they feel totally competent with. I'm happy with that subject. I know my stuff. I'm going to be fine. And other subjects that they're really struggling in. Okay. And the important thing is to get a balance and to make sure that you're ready for every exam. So you may have done it yourself as well, where you let go of the subject that you think you're really good at, and I'll be fine with that one. Let me concentrate on this subject because it's my weaker area. And a lot of times students do really well in the subject that was weaker, and they do less well in the subject they were more able in, just because they didn't give them the time that they needed. So it's all about making sure that you have covered everything that you need to cover for that exam. in time. And that's where our time management system comes in, which we'll talk a bit more about that in a little while. Now, Vicky's asked another question about what happens if it gets really boring when they've revised for a long time. Well, they should never be revising for such a long time that it gets boring. And this is where the work I do with teenagers really pays off, because the approach I take is that we want them to work smarter, not harder. Now, a lot of times, especially more academically able students, they'll spend hours and hours tucked away in their bedroom, you know, revising, working really hard. But what they're not recognizing, that their learning efficiency is dropping off in that time. Now, we will find a way to post some resources so you can see what I'm talking about. But what happens, I'll try and show it on screen so that you can see it. Let me see if I can find the resource I have ready. In terms of time management, yeah, see if Lucy can hold this up.
Possibly.
Hi, Lucy.
Is that it?
Right.
Oh,
okay. So in terms of learning efficiency, don't worry if you can't read the writing. I think it might even be reversed. But what happens when we first start learning is we're at 100% efficiency when we start. And then very quickly, you can see the curve drop off. Now, that's divided into 3 hours, okay, split into 20-minute sections. So you can see after an hour, that student's half as efficient as they were when they first started. And if they carry on working after that hour without any breaks and they're just working away, they may as well have stopped after an hour, really, let's face it, because their efficiency is just dropping down so much. But can you see how I've shown on the top line, their time up into short bursts? I've shown 20 minutes here, but I'll come back to that in a minute. Their efficiency stays up, so it's, I can't point. So it's sort of higher at the for each 20 minutes, and they're topping it up. Now I'll move the resource because I think, again, it's just difficult. I wasn't sure how that would show on the screen. But the principle is, for adults as well, our concentration spans are about 20 minutes maximum, and that's for an adult. So, yeah, thanks, Lucy. So for a young person, their efficiency after 20 minutes will be, it might not even be 20 minutes, it could be less, it could be 10 minutes. So their efficiency will just keep dropping off over that time. So what they need to learn to do is to break up their time into short bursts. And students love this idea because it doesn't seem like such a drag anymore. They don't have to sit for hours and hours and hours and it's not going in. One of the worst things for students is to sit there and then be thinking, hang on, I've been working away for the last 10 minutes and nothing's gone in. Even an hour sometimes people don't realise. Thank you. Lucy's just brought me a glass of water. Thank you. So students need to know that they can break their time up and they can work in short bursts, and that's perfectly all right. And when we do the time management tool, we're encouraging them to plan to do maybe an hour's work here and there, because it gets complicated if you do any less than that, really. But divide that hour up. And the way I explain it to teenagers is teachers do this in lessons all the time. They teach for maybe an hour, but they're asked to divide that lesson up into different activities. And that's to keep the young person's interest and to keep their efficiency as high as it can, okay? Now, sometimes I say this to teenagers and I say, so you need to work in short bursts, 10 to 20 minutes, and then you change activities and you do something different. It's not a case of, oh, I've done 20 minutes work, so now I'll go on the PS4 for 3 hours. It's short bursts are more effective. And the young person, once they understand this, they'll find their way of doing it. They'll find their optimum working time. And this is where parents can be involved as well. So when they're set to do a revision session, what the student needs to think about is, what do I want to get out of this revision session? It no longer is, I need to sit and work for 3 hours because I've got exams coming up and I've got to work as hard as I can in that time. It becomes an exercise in what is my motivation for this session? Where do I hope to get to? You know, am I going to get to the bottom of page 10 by the time I get up and leave the room, or am I aiming to just do this particular topic and then stop? So what is there? What are they doing it for? Where do they expect to get to in that time? So it's to put a little bit of urgency into that 10-minute or 20-minute burst of energy, okay? Now, where parents can come in with all of this is a young person might have said to themselves, right, I'm going to revise this topic and then I'm going to ask dad to test me. Or I'm going to ask mum if she can read out what's on this page and ask me some questions. So by involving someone else, they've got that urgency, they've got that purpose, they've got a reason for doing it. And it becomes an exercise that instead of being trapped in their room working on their own and feeling isolated and worried and stressed and anxious, they are feeling that they've got people around them, that they know how to ask for help. They've got, very often with young people, is they feel like they have to do it all themselves. If a parent says anything at all about how's your revision going, or are you going to do some revision tonight, the student picks up, because they're feeling stressed anyway, they pick up this kind of almost like a judgment, even though you didn't intend that, of, oh yes, I know I'm supposed to be getting on with it, and I haven't done it yet. So they start to just have an edge and start to get stressed. And what we're trying to do is to avoid them ever feeling the stress of it. We want them to feel in control and to feel like they are moving forward and they know how to handle it. Now, as adults, we know ourselves, if we feel stressed about something, we want control over it. We may ask for help, but really what we're doing is we're wanting to find a way to be successful ourselves. And as a parent, the best thing you can do is to give a young person the tools to be able to do it for themselves. You know, maybe that's a time management tool like ours. I don't necessarily mean that. It's anything that helps that young person to have a strategy, to have ways of moving forward. And one of the best things you can do is to offer to test them if they're ready to be tested, to maybe take some of the tedium out of the planning side of it by doing it with them, or certain, you know, in our revision planning tool, there are certain steps that we say, well, actually parents could do that bit because you're so busy trying to commit things to memory. Maybe they can do the boring bit with the boxes, and you know. So there are ways that parents can get involved and show that they care and help without becoming experts in the subject. They don't need to be experts in the subject. And a lot of parents say to me, I don't know how to help my teen with revision because it's a long time since I was at school, and they may have their own hang-ups about how they approached exams, as Vicky alluded to at the very beginning. And so they feel a bit lost about how best they can support. But the best thing as a parent is to just let them know that you understand that they're finding this difficult. Find ways of exploring that with them without, it's about asking open questions and not closed questions. It's about being able to say, you know, so how are you feeling about that at the moment? And what could I do to help you to move forward? You know, it's about getting the student to recognize that they're not the only person in this position, that they have friends who are going through the same exams. When I was at school, and at university even, exams, it felt like it was a competition. It felt like you were on your own and you had to, you know, you sank or swam really, and based on what you did. But what universities are recognising more and more, and schools, is collaborative working is a much better way of being successful. So by that I mean, you can encourage a young person to maybe revise a topic and then teach that to a friend who's struggling with it, or maybe work together on a topic. And explain it to each other and test each other. Now, there are lots of different techniques to get the fun element into revision. Schools will tell students about mind mapping. Some students really like doing mind maps. Maybe revision cards, that kind of thing. But I just think it's it's more than that. It's about being interactive. A lot of students will spend a long time making beautiful revision cards, and I've got no end of samples that students give me, so proud that they've done this revision, and they look wonderful. And the problem with it may not have gone into the student's brain. It might be all on paper, they've copied it out, it's beautiful, but it hasn't gone into their head. In my view, having worked with a lot of students now, it doesn't matter what the piece of paper looks like that's got the information on. It can be scribbled, it can be, you know, just a tiny thing, really, just one point on a piece of paper. If it allows that student to ask someone else to test them on it, give it to someone else and say, can you test me on this? Then it's done its job. And one of the simplest methods I've ever come across that I've developed with students is they write, let's say they've got to learn keywords for one of their subjects, or they need to learn a language and they've got to use their vocabulary and know what words mean. So you would write the word on one side, the definition on the other side of a piece of paper. I like to tear up a sheet of A4 paper into smaller and smaller bits till you end up with the size that you're happy with. Make a little wallet out of one of those. So don't tear the last sheet, make that into a little wallet. And then put everything in there, just very simple. And you write the keywords on one side, you write the definition on the other side. And the student would sit and they would try and commit that to memory. After a point in time, they would then ask someone to test them. And this is where you involve friends, parents, whoever's around. Test me on this, see if I've learnt it properly, that kind of thing. Now, what studies have shown is if you get something around 3 separate occasions, it's pretty much in your long-term memory. So if you ask a parent to test you and you get it right, the parent or the student ticks a box on the front of that card. So they did it once. The next time they may have forgotten it, it needs refreshing, they only got so many of the points right. So you just work through the cards and you make those piles of cards get smaller and smaller. So the student can see visually, I'm being successful, I'm getting somewhere with this. What we've got to do is encourage them to be successful right from the start. So your question, Vicky, about how soon should they start, my answer would be start now. Imperfect action is better than no action at all. Okay, so if you do something and it's successful and the young person feels like, oh, that worked, I can try something else, you've then engaged them in the process, you've got them interested, you've got them thinking, I'm not a failure, I can do it. I mean, there's so much information I want to get across, and without questions it's quite difficult to know, but I think there are other key things that you need to know, and I'm conscious that time's ticking on. Where are we now, time-wise? Right, so I've got about 20 minutes. What I'm going to suggest is if I just tell you some other hints and tips. It's all a bit muddled in this. I'm just kind of talking off the top of my head, but I think there are key bits of information that parents need to know in order to help the young person. So just going back to the way the brain, yes, specific techniques for particular subjects. I'll come back to that in a minute, Vicky. I'm just going to go back to the way the brain is structured for a moment, okay? And this is something that you may want to share with your teenager, because I think once teenagers understand this, it makes a big difference to how they see exams. So the most important part of the teenager's brain in terms of sitting exams is the emotional part, okay? Now, there's a really lovely analogy that's come from, excuse me, my favourite book about how the brain works, which is, it's backwards on yours, Lucy, but it's by Andrew Curran, and it's called The Little Book of Big Stuff About the Brain. And he describes how the emotional brain interacts with the high level thinking in a really simple way. What he says is, if you imagine there are 100 billion brain cells in your brain, and whenever you think about something, it creates templates in your brain. So different parts of your brain light up. So it might be the bit to do with visual, auditory, you know, all sorts of different parts of your brain light up. So if you think of, let's use an example. If I asked you to think about a grey animal, something will be springing to your mind now. And most people think of an elephant or a mouse, okay? But head you'll have images that are to do with that, you know, maybe childhood pictures that were in books when you were little. You may have seen a real elephant in real life. So whatever that means to you, great animal, will start triggering a template in your brain as to what that means to you. And then when you think about and add to that knowledge, you're creating stronger and stronger templates in the brain. Now, in order to revise, you need to understand what it is that you're revising. So it's absolutely no good trying to revise if you don't understand the topics in the first place. So one of the steps that we've put in our K-Revision planning tool is to encourage the students to firstly make sure that they understand the topics. If they don't understand the topics, then they need to find someone to help them with that. So go back to a teacher, ask a friend, you know, look on a website. You've got to understand the topic in the first place. When you understand it, then you can get on with revising it. And revising is just simply building firmer templates in your brain so that when you sit in the exam room, all this information floods back to you. Okay. Now, there's lots of different websites with advice on memory techniques, you know, so there's visual image chains, there's mnemonics, all sorts of different ways of remembering things, different strategies that students can use. In my view, the simplest way to get a student to revise is to ask them, what do you already know about that topic? Okay, so if you say to someone, what do you already know, you are getting into that template that's already there in the brain, and then you can build on that and you can make stronger and stronger memories. The idea of this is you want the young person to go into the exam room feeling that they can draw on those strategies, not, oh, it was on a revision card and I can't remember what it said. You want them to sit there and link their learning to something that's already there in their mind. I have got some examples of this. I'm conscious about not wasting time, but I'm just going to tell you one of them, okay? My daughter, she was doing a core science exam. It was her very first exam. She didn't want my help. She kind of pushed me away and said, I just want you to make cups of tea. At that point, she just thought everybody was cleverer than her and she was going to fail. But she didn't tell me that. She said she was fine. She was struggling. She had to remember methane and ethane and what the chemical composition, and it's 4 carbons and 1 hydrogen. No, 1 carbon, sorry, and 4 hydrogens is methane. And ethane is 6 hydrogens and 2 carbons, right? I'm not a scientist. It kind of vaguely means something to be, but it's not my bag really. All I said to Hannah was, what do you already know about methane? And she kind of said, cows trump it out. That was the only thing she knew was about methane gas and that cows produce it, and it was something to do with landfill. She then, suddenly a light bulb went on and she said, I'm going to use the C for cow. So that's a cow and it's got 4 legs, 4 hydrogens. And laughed and said, so ethane's Siamese twin cows because it's 2 carbons and 6 hydrogens. So out of something really silly, because it was something that made sense to Hannah, if she sat in the exam room and she thought, what do I know about methane, all of that would flood back to her. Now can you see how that's one example of just saying to someone, what do you already know about whatever the topic is? So you are linking their learning. They're not having to come up with mnemonics that other people have come up with and it doesn't make any sense to them and they get all stressed about it. It's about that young person. What do I already know and how do I want to learn that? You're making revision become something fun, interactive. You know, parents can work with students. The student might not want it. They might rather come to you and say, test me on this. I'm not going to tell you how I've learned it, but just test me. That's, you know, my son preferred it that way and a lot of students do. But you can get very creative. And the idea is you're taking the stress out of it. That becomes a fun thing to do. That becomes something that someone can be successful at and they enjoy doing, so they're going to want to do more of it. Okay, so let's have a look. Right, now when students get overwhelmed, and you know, they can't even begin to even think about starting their revision, what they actually need is what teachers would refer to as scaffolding. They need to, you know, if you're on the outside of a building, you would need to have some scaffolding there so you can climb up, you know. So the kinesthetic revision planning tool that we've created is based on that. It provides scaffolding to help that young person to start the process a little bit at a time. Okay, and what you don't want to do is to overwhelm the student and say, well, we've got to have all this done by a certain time. It's one step at a time. It's as they feel like it, and you're encouraging them to be more and more successful. So, like I said earlier, imperfect action is better than no action. And for a young person who's feeling totally overwhelmed by the amount of work that they've got to do, it's about breaking that up and helping them to see that it's not as bad as they thought. This is why one of the steps in the kinesthetic revision planning tool is for the student to just tick which topics they're already comfortable with, because you know they're going to understand a lot of what they've already learned. Particularly the higher, more able students will be able to quickly tick most of those boxes. Yeah, I get that. So they can be successful quite quickly. Now that step that's in the tool is about using what the student already has to hand. So the best thing is to use revision guides. If you think about the amount of work that a young person has to learn for every spelling, okay? Now, when we were at school, I don't know about you, but I never came across anything like a revision guide, really. So revision guides, the experts have already condensed the information into the essential information that the student needs. So they know exam papers, and they know what the students should learn. So it takes all that worry out of it for the student. And, you know, some students are really neat. They've got everything that teachers ever gave them and it's all nicely presented in full. Other students are very chaotic and they've lost sheets that they were given by school. They don't know what the topic list is. Some students actually have no idea which exam paper covers which topics. So, you know, knowing whether the students sit in a foundation or a higher level paper, knowing what's in each paper. If you're not sure, you email school and you say, please, can you clarify this for me? You know, our son's sitting this exam and we have no idea what's on which paper. Please, would you let us know? Or you can go to the awarding bodies, to their websites and check it out. So if they're sitting an AQA exam, you go on the AQA website and you see what the curriculum is. So knowledge is power, information is power. Firstly, the student needs to know what they're facing, because otherwise they're worried that there's this monster in the future and they don't know quite what's involved in it. So it's about getting a handle on things. It's about taking the fear out of the situation, to feel that there's nothing to worry about, that they are making progress and they know what they've got to do. Now, as adults, we know ourselves, if we've got a big task to do, we have to try and break it up into little manageable chunks and to divide our time up. So I've shown you about the learning efficiency graph and how to encourage them to break their time up. What I would say is encourage the student to work for maybe 10 or 20 minutes, and then even just getting up and, you know, sticking a poster on the wall, getting some oxygen to their brain, doing something a bit different. Some students will just run up and down the stairs and go and make a cup of tea and then get back to it. What I say to students is you don't want to have such a long break that your brain goes into shutdown mode again and it's hard for you to get remotivated. You want to have a short rest, like a computer going into a little bit of a, you know, all you've got to do is wiggle the mouse and it's back on again. It hasn't gone completely into shutdown. So there's little things like that, which is all to do with the brain waves and which brainwave cycle that you're in. So it's about keeping the student, firstly, feeling motivated, and also realizing that they have control, they can divide their time up, and supporting them with those decisions. Now, in terms of what you say to a young person who's feeling overwhelmed, let me just get across what I think it is that they need to know from you as a parent. I think it's important that teenagers know that you love them no matter what. You know, if they, for whatever reason, mess these exams up, you're not going to love them any less. And a lot of students think that they'll be letting everyone down if they fail. That's exactly the opposite to what you as a parent think. You become stressed yourself about helping the young person because you care about them and you don't want to see them struggling, and you don't want to see them fail either. So they need to know that you trust them to solve their problem, but you also recognize that they need some support. It may be you personally who supports them. It may be that you just buy them a tool that can help them with that. The key thing is that they know that you understand what they're going through. So by asking them open questions, you know, how do you feel about that? What would make that feel better? Is there somebody that you could ask about the fact that you feel stuck with this topic? You know, and so you're trying to encourage them to come up with strategies that are going to help them to move forward. They're feeling anxious, they're feeling stuck, and they need a solution to that problem. Now, this is all explained on our website, but if you give any indication to a young person that you're putting them under more stress, if you push, they resist. So they're already feeling quite pushed by school and by teachers, and you know, teachers have a lot resting on this, so they tend to kind of, you know, without meaning to, put pressure on young people because they want results as well. So it doesn't take much for a young person to feel totally overwhelmed. And what you've got to do is to break that down and to get a young person to realize that they have strategies, that they are in control, that they may not want to do it the way their friends do it. They may not like an auditory way of remembering things. They might prefer a different way to how their friends do it. So there's all sorts of revision strategies that people can use. It's about that young personalizing what works for them. But you're there to support them with, you know, in any way that you can. So one of the basic things, obviously, is looking after their physical needs, making sure they've got, and they know that you're providing them with the right food and sustenance and tea at the right time and all of those kind of things, and that you're encouraging them to have breaks and you're encouraging them to manage their time and to get a balance. Doing well in exams is all about getting a balance so you don't get overwhelmed and you don't get that thing where you can't think straight because you're absolutely exhausted and you care too much and you've got too stressed about it all. Doing well in exams is about being able to divide your time up, do a little and often, definitely build in relaxation. I think a lot of students think that parents think they should be working all the time. And very often what happens is a young person will be in their room trying to revise, feeling that they're not getting anywhere, getting frustrated, not telling a parent that that's how they're feeling. So they can go on for months with that building up, and parents haven't noticed how stressed they are. But one of the worst things a student does is they use displacement activities. So they might be checking social time, they might be reading a book, they could be doing anything other than what they're supposed to be doing, which is the revision. Now, all that happens there is a student can't trick their own brain. They can't know they should be revising and they haven't revised. That just adds to their stress. So, and then they start worrying more. So what you're doing is you're trying to help them to manage that. So there's a few questions here that I realise we ought to have a quick look at. I say to teens that school tests certain things that may not be the things that they're really good at. I think that's a very good point, Vicky. It's difficult, isn't it? What students have to do almost is learn to play the game, I'm afraid, at this stage. They have to know what paper and they have to revise the topics that are on there. And it's important really for students to realise that they can have interests and they can be really good at certain things, and doing well in exams is only one aspect of who they are as a person. It doesn't mean they're a failure if they're not brilliant at exams, but they are going to be more successful in exams if you take the stress out of it. Is there a best time of day to revise is another question. Again, a really good question. That depends on the student. Most students at this age, they're growing their brains basically, and the school day is not the right day for a teenager. Really, most teenagers wake up something like 11 or 12 o'clock, even 1 o'clock, and they've missed hours of school by the time they've kind of got with the plot, really. But unfortunately, that's just, you know, they've got to fit in with society, haven't they? Certainly, students shouldn't be on things like social media, computers, anything with a screen. They shouldn't be on that within an hour of bedtime, because they're not actually switching their brains off and getting good quality sleep. So what I would say is early evening is probably time to revise in short bursts. If a student has done what I suggested earlier and they've got little revision cards and little pieces of information that they've kind of broken down and put on a piece of paper, they can revise standing at the top. You know, that revision is not sitting at your desk or on your bed trying to work. Revision is part of your day. Just having a quick look at something, going over it, testing yourself again, and being engaged in what you do. So in terms of the best time of day, all I would say is they need to make sure they also have enough time for sleep. And working late at night when you're on your last energy reserves is not the right. You should be doing it when you feel fresh. And one of the best things a student can do is to stay behind in school, take advantage of any revision sessions that are going on in school or at lunch times, and do as much as they can before they go home, make the most of their school day. And again, that's where the revision guide comes in. If they've ticked topics and they kind of get most things, but they're stuck on something, they can use the time that's left in school before they go off on study leave, if indeed they get any, to go to a teacher and say, please, can you go over this topic? I really don't get it. And that's part of a mindset. If a student is that they can go to a teacher and say, look, I've gone through my revision list, I'm fine with all of these, but I'm stuck with that. That is such an empowering, that allows the teacher to think, wow, they're really trying hard. Yes, I will go that extra mile, come back at lunchtime for 5 minutes and I'll go over it with you. You know, and that boosting a student, that's helping them to see, wow, people are willing to help me. And, you know, if a student says to a teacher, sir, I don't get it, miss, I don't understand any of it, the teacher can't help them, it's too much. If the student is splitting it up and saying, I'm stuck with this little bit, please can you help me, they will get help. So I think I'm just at the time. I think I've raced through a lot of more information and a lot more hints and tips that we can give you. What do you think, Vicky? Do you want to end it there?
Yeah, I've just unmuted myself there. Yeah, I think, yeah, you've given lots of information. Oh, I'm getting feedback. Hold on. Let me check. Oh. Okay, I'm going to talk, but I am getting feedback to myself, which is a bit off-putting. Yeah, I think probably as you teach, short bursts is good for learning for teenagers. Perhaps short bursts is good for people that are listening to this webinar as well. And you have lots and lots of information there. What's been really interesting for me actually is the key, your sort of key learning being that the emotions around exams and revision are so important, and that sort of stress reaction, if you're having an adrenal stress reaction, then you're not, you're actually damaging your ability to learn and revise. I think that's a really important key message to take away, really. So to reduce that stress for parents as well, and for parents to what I thought was interesting that you said that parents actually don't need to know about that subject. It's not their job to teach their children. It's their job to be there to support them and to enable them, and and to really kind of provide that sort of nurturing environment, really, so they can feel loved and supported and and, you know, enabled to do as well as they can do, and to know that it's all going to be fine regardless of the outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. And that sometimes gets lost, doesn't it, in all the stress. It's a really stressful time for parents and teenagers, and anything that you can do to take that stress away, you know. One last thing I'll say is something that I've heard mentioned quite a lot, is the idea that you need to fill yourself up first before you can help other people. So as far as parents go, the analogy with if you're on an aeroplane and the oxygen masks come down, you need to put your own oxygen mask on first. You need to look after yourself before you can then have any reserves left to help other people. And I think that's crucial with teenagers. Both the parent and the young person, they need time out. They need to have built-in opportunities to relax and not take it all so seriously that it gets really, really stressful. And it can be fun. I mean, I've had a lot of fun with my kids. Not initially, they were quite resistant initially to having my help, but once they realized I was there totally as they wanted me to be, and I wasn't trying to push, because if you push, they resist. So if you're just there for them, and they can express how they feel, I think that makes a big difference to the young person, that you're not judging.
Yes, and I think, you know, my children are 18 and 20 now, and, you know, I used to say to them, you know, if this doesn't go the way that you want it to, and there's, you know, we hope that it will, but, you know, funny things can happen in exams. If it doesn't go the way you want it to or the way you need it to, it really isn't the end of the world. You're not going to die. There's always the opportunity to go back and do it again. And that's not difficult to do.
Yeah. I think a lot of it is about putting the fun back. And I've got so many other things I could have shared. It was difficult to know which ones to hone in on, really. But, you know, one of the key things is to make it fun and relevant to them. You know, something that they want to do, they feel emotionally involved in, and then they will remember it better.
Yes,
that's the key message.
It is, yeah, it is. Yeah, I think unfortunately school is very different, certainly from when I was at school. And there is this, as you said, there, you know, the generations of children that are going through school now, they are constantly tested from the time they start school to the time they leave. And there's this constant pressure to be good enough, to do well enough for themselves, for, you know, all sorts of people. And, you know, that need to achieve is immense, really, for them. So whatever we can do as parents to take that pressure off, and also, you know, to help them to nurture that love of learning. I think that's such an important thing, to love to learn something new. That's the crucial thing, really. It doesn't matter whether it's biology or history or music or physics, whatever. It's the love of learning and the willingness to take a risk and to learn something new. So do you want to just let everybody know how they can get in touch with you if they want to find out some more about what you do and how they might be able to work with you?
Yes, I mean, the best way is to use the contact details on the website. It's got the email address that comes directly to me. Mags is tied up during the day, but I'll feed anything through. You know, we're constantly in touch. There's a phone number as well, but that email address would be fine. I think it's
and your website address
Learn to Love Exams.
Do you want to just say what your website address is?
Sorry, it's learntoloveexams.com.
Okay, that's lovely. So yes, I think if you type it into the chat box, then anybody that's on chat will be able to see that. Okay, so thank you so much for it's been a bit of a trial, hasn't it, trying to get everything onto the webinar. But you know, we're here to learn as well. So if anybody wants to get in touch with me, I mean, I don't specifically focus on work around exams, but you know, my mission in life through my work is to help parents to have the relationship that they had envisaged with their teenagers, whether that's around exams, whether it's around, you know, developing relationships, or anything really, just communication, how you can make your life much more joyful really with your teenager. Because I hear so much that people are either dreading their children becoming teenagers, or they you know, secretly will confess to me that they actually don't like their children anymore because they're teenagers, because they don't really know how to communicate with them, and they don't really know how to love them anymore, because they've become some kind of alien being in their house that they hadn't really anticipated. So if anybody wants to get in touch with me, my website address is well-kids.co.uk, and I'm happy to answer any questions or to jump onto Skype with you if you wanted to do that. So I think I'm just about to lose my voice. I can hear my voice going a bit peculiar. So if there's nothing else. Sorry, carry on.
No, I just said well done. Sorry, Vicky, I shouldn't have interrupted them, because I know you're not on top form tonight. So well done for staying the course.
I'm just aware that if I don't speak very often, my voice doesn't come out very well when I start to try and speak. Yeah, so thank you very much, and I think we should end there. And if anybody, the recording will go out to everybody, anybody that's live on the call or anybody that registered. And of course, if anybody wants to contact me or Mags or Lucy, you can do. And if anybody would like to have another webinar, then you could just contact us and I can set that up again. So I'm going to just stop the broadcast now and say good night to everybody.
Okay. Good night. Thanks, Vicky.
Good night.
Bye.
See you soon.